On to our first question, and this goes to Ntefeleng. And Ntefeleng, you have done quite a bit of research, or your organization does quite a bit of research, and you've mapped out 131 philanthropic collaborations benefiting Africa. And in your study, 80% were established after 2010, indicating very rapid growth. So the question I have for you is, from your research, what is the reason for this rapid growth? And what are the predominant models of collaborative and pooled infrastructure frameworks across the continent?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Kandindi. My name is Ntefeleng Nene. I am a partner at Brisbane. I also head our Brisbane Africa office. I'm really delighted to be here. It is my first EAPN conference, so really excited. Yes, maybe let me quickly start by describing what we do as Brisbane. So Brisbane is a non-profit organization. We provide advisory services to philanthropy, to NPOs, and to impact investors. We also have a leadership development program that we launched last year to support NPOs around, across the continent. And lastly, we conduct a lot of research, and this research is based on the experiences, the learnings that we have from the work that we do, which then brings me to the research that we did, Dr. Katindi. So we have studied the field of philanthropic collaboratives globally for many, many years. And in the past, I would say 3 years or so, with the support from the Gates Foundation, we did 2 pieces of research. The first one was to conduct a landscape analysis of what the philanthropic collaborative landscape looks like specifically in Africa. And then the second research was to quantify the capital that actually flows into these collaboratives. And maybe let me ground my response in defining what we mean by philanthropic collaboratives in the context of Africa. So in our research, we define philanthropic collaboratives as structured partnerships. They are co-created by 3 or more independent actors. They include at least one funder with a shared vision and strategy for achieving social impact. They use pooled resources, and they have pre-arranged governance mechanisms. And by contrast, what we have learned as Brisbane is that collaboratives in the US are primarily made up of donors. And the reason why I'm making this contrast is because our work on philanthropic collaboratives has been across the continent, but also in the US. Whereas philanthropic collaboratives in Africa are a multi-stakeholder affair, they actually involve government, civil society organizations, and private sector as strategic partners working together. Philanthropic collaboratives in Africa also solve for complex systemic issues. They also have independent entities just to eliminate the potential of brand issues with funders. And I think the research also tells us that collaborative philanthropy is a fast-growing segment of the philanthropic landscape. And so, to the research, Dr. Katindi, we identified over 130 philanthropic collaborations in Africa, and this is not an exhaustive list. And 73 of these are actually focused exclusively on the continent, whereas 63 of these are headquartered on the continent. And to your specific question around, the fact that 80% were established after 2010, why is this rapid growth? First is the fact that there's a recognition by funders that the social challenges that we encounter on the continent are very systemic, and so they cannot be solved by an isolated grant. The second one is the recognition by funders that they need to work together for scale and greater impact. And then the third, I would say, is that many collaboratives are actually being established to move resources and decision-making closer to communities and local actors. And so, indulge me for 1 minute here as I share the data points. What is particularly concerning for me is the fact that 60% of African collaboratives have annual budgets of below 10 million in US dollars, while 70% of global collaboratives actually have annual budgets of more than 10 million US dollars. And the research also found that just over 1 billion goes to African philanthropies, African collaboratives, whereas they actually have the capacity to absorb twice as much. And then I'll wrap up by just maybe illustrating some of the predominant models that exist on the continent. The one is the PROT funds. We have the field building collaboratives. We have government-aligned collaboratives. And the great example that I always use is the Ouagadougou Partnerships Coordination Unit based in Dakar, Senegal. And then we have community and women's funds collaboratives, ADWF and all of them. And then the diaspora and citizen fund vehicles, which my brother Abraham is going to speak to. And then lastly, the issue-based collaboratives. So I will stop there.
Nice. Thank you very much. And that's really interesting. And so maybe I want to turn to you, Margaret. As you introduce yourself, I know Ford Foundation has been around since the 1930s, and you've built quite a legacy in terms of this space. So, but a few years ago, you started the Build program. And in this Build program, you had a massive, contribution to make in the sector of $1 billion. And you wanted to strengthen institutional capacity of grantees. And so I wanted you to briefly describe this architecture of this, because that's really an impressive amount. And I want you to also elaborate what's the rationale, or what was the rationale behind this architecture.
So thank you very much, Dr. Katindi. As you've heard, my name is Margaret Mliwa. I'm the Regional Director of the Ford Foundation, Eastern Africa region. And interestingly, we are celebrating 90 years since our inception. So we are old. And so, as we've mentioned, one of the things that we've done over the 90 years is really to learn and ask ourselves deep questions of what we need to do. So in 2016, from learning, and this was, this was brought about by the frustrations that many of our partners had. They were getting 1 year project fund, and yet they were expected to bring, or rather to have impact. And so we also recognized the fact that there was power imbalance between the grant makers and grant seekers. So in that power imbalance, then what happened was many of our partners, that is grantees, were really chasing for small grants and were only concentrating on implementing projects, but they were not thinking about the institutions. So our belief was that, and up to now it is, that if you need to really have impact, you must have strong institutions. So we anchored, we started thinking about how do we make sure that we are balancing between the work and strengthening the institutions. So the belief then was that if we give 5 long-term grants and big grants, multi-year, that focus more on the mission of the organization, then we would give organizations space to think and to be able to, to build the institution itself. And that is, building the institution then meant you need to think about your people, you need to think about your finances, you need to think about everything that has to do, whether it's your communication strategy. Because then organizations were giving very little money towards thinking about the institution because they wanted to keep their overhead low. And so the architects and the rationale behind it was to make sure that we are having long-term. And this specific fund then allowed you to even set up a reserve fund. Because if you needed, or rather you made savings, you could save that money for future. And we only asked you to develop a policy to manage your reserve fund. Yeah.
Wow, that is very interesting.
And just to clarify, the resources were not 1 billion; it was $2 billion for 12 years.
It even gets more.
Yeah.
All right, that's interesting. And we'll come back to you so that you can also tell us a bit of the challenges and the opportunities that you see in that kind of structure. But allow me to talk to you, Abraham. In the Kenyan Constitution, this will be a very unconstitutional gathering because we are less than 30% representation, but it's good to have you on board. You run a very interesting fund. So you are in charge of the Ethiopia Diaspora Trust Fund, and it represents an entirely different model that hasn't been, I don't know whether it has been seen before in Africa, but you basically have created sovereignty with funds that are coming from abroad, and you want to do that for purposes of development in Ethiopia. So my question to you is briefly describe the history of this fund, because it is quite unique, and the rationale of setting it up, as well as the architecture that governs it. Because in some of our countries, you were saying if money just comes out like that, it would be intercepted before it really gets to the use that it is intended for. And obviously, I'm very interested to know how much on average is it that you manage every year?
Thank you so much, Dr. Katindi. And I'd like to express my appreciation for the organizers of this program, this conference. This is our first time as the Ethiopian Diaspora Trust Fund to be in midst of this beautiful gathering in Ethiopia. And I'd like to, maybe I can represent this country or the city to welcome you to Ethiopia again. Well, I don't know if somebody came yesterday and welcomed everyone to the beautiful city of Addis. So the Ethiopian Diaspora Trust Fund was actually spearheaded by the Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Dr. Abiy Ahmed. So the whole thinking was, people sent money to Ethiopia from across the world. Remittances, like any African countries, although we are not in the 10 most powerful recipients of remittances, but we are there. We received that money for the purpose of different things, education, housing, and other things, but it was not satisfying whatever development aspirations that we had for the country. So the Prime Minister devised a theory of contributing $1 a day from an individual that lives outside Ethiopia. That was announced in the US. So after his call, people were inspired. People in the diaspora, especially during that time, it was a time of transition for the country, a political and economic transition for the country. So they were inspired. So immediately what happened after his call is there was a secretariat that was gathered to actually collaborate on bringing together the mechanisms to bring the money into the country and making sure that it shouldn't be abused in the way that you mentioned earlier. So the governance structure was established after his call, but it was not a very smooth process. It took, there were hiccups in different times, but it took some time to be fully established. But after that, people from the diaspora, the US and other countries, especially professionals in the banking sector, humanitarian sector, academicians, Ethiopian-born and second-generation Ethiopians were called to be part of the board of directors. So the board of directors is interested to run the whole fund. So right after that, the whole structure, the whole diaspora structure started contributing to this. So people have this assumption that the Ethiopian Diaspora Trust Fund only contributes for issues of socio-economic nature, for schools, hospitals, and other things. But starting from last year, we have also a very big initiative, which is the Great Rift Valley Summit. It's a summit that contributes to entrepreneurs who are engaged in agriculture, health, and education. So we have released around 700,000 USD last year alone for about 18 entrepreneurs that are engaged in those areas. So coming to the accountability of the whole thing, it has a very strong governance model. It's not only overseen by the board of directors that are residing in different parts of the world, the US being the leading country, but we have an office in Ethiopia, in Addis. So this office oversees the projects that we have across the country, everywhere in Ethiopia, including the GRV Summit. And we have a very strong working relationship that makes sure that everything is apolitical. The government or any policy of the government is not linked to whatever we're doing in here. So it's not related to what the government policy aspires to achieve. We are completely apolitical, so our projects are funded and our projects are actually initiated by individuals within the board, and people are involved in different capacities, and that's what I can say about the overall thing. But I am somehow overwhelmed because it is my first time talking to African brothers and sisters about the Ethiopian Diaspora Trust Fund, and the opportunity presented itself very late. So I could say this much, and in later times I could add some more on that.
All right. Thank you very much. And I think Ethiopia is really setting the pace on this one, and I think it really deserves a clap. Thank you. So in this second round, I want us to shift a little bit, and I want us to explore the challenges, the real world tensions that are happening, of shared governance, of competing priorities, of operational friction, partly because, as we were told in the morning, there is, of course, the way resources are dispersed is changing. We're having more collaboration. So what do those challenges, really, present? And I'll start with you, Ntefeleng, again. Your data does point to these major challenges in many ways, and you did say that in your first submission, that collaborative architecture has accelerated rapidly, and that, government infrastructure is actually not keeping pace, right? So when multiple funders share a vehicle, what are the primary governance points where these structures typically fracture or break?
Thank you so much. I will dive right into it. The first one is strategic clarity. I think what we have found is that many funders may agree on the broad goal in terms of what they want to achieve, whether it is investing in education, whether it is gender equity, etc. But what is not clear at times is the investment thesis. So really asking pertinent questions around what types of organizations are they trying to fund? Are they wanting to build a field out of this collaborative? Are they aligned on the measurable outcomes? And so it's important to ask those questions because they actually require different governance mechanisms. And so that's the first challenge. And then the second one is around decision-making power. And we've had this before, right? So in theory, the pooled funding vehicles are a collective effort. That is great. But in practice, the large donors, the founding donors, they can sometimes dominate the collaborative, and then that creates a tension between the donor control and proximate leadership. And I do want to share a great example of a collaborative, the African Collaborative, that is led by my great sisters, Ati and Katie. They had designed this collaborative with this challenge in mind specifically. And what they did is that the funders are not founders of the African collaboratives, just to try and manage that power. And then secondly, they do not have funders playing any governance role in terms of the collaborative. And that is by design. So really want to give a shout out to Ati and her team. And then the third challenge is around risk appetite. And so we know that some funders are very interested in funding systemic change. They have adopted the trust-based philanthropy principles. They fund long-term systems work, but some funders aren't interested in that. They have their short timelines, they have their restricted funding mechanisms, and that creates a challenge. And then I would say the last challenge, Dr. Katindi, is around operating infrastructure. And this is where we challenge funders to really fund what it takes. Sometimes we have these collaboratives that do not have enough resources in terms of staffing, in terms of the convening, in terms of the due diligence systems and measurement mechanisms that are required. I think it would be amiss of me, though, to not mention that about 2 years ago, we actually did a research again on how to measure philanthropic collaboratives, and that was a global research that we did. And with this, we are continuously seeing that the measurement systems are still putting more emphasis on grantee outputs. instead of really measuring the portfolio level systems change, measuring donor behavior, so that we are able to then, adjust, adapt as needed. So those are some of the challenges that I will point to.
All right. And earlier on in your submission, you had talked about undercapitalization in Africa, and maybe just to ask you, what's, in terms of this undercapitalization, tell us a little bit about what is available in African, philanthropy. And basically, what are the structural conditions that sustain this pattern, so that we can close that gap? Because if we don't understand it, it still remains a question that we complain about, but it remains unanswered.
Yes, great. So I think, as I mentioned, pointing out that philanthropic collaboratives in Africa are under-resourced, it doesn't necessarily mean that there is lack of evidence in terms of the demand of this vehicle. So that's the first point I'll say. It also doesn't necessarily translate to the fact that there are weak ideas in Africa. It doesn't translate to the fact that we do not have strong institutions on the continent. So that's the first call out. What it simply means really is that we seem to have a mismatch between the capital architecture that exists globally and this collaborative infrastructure that is emerging on the continent. And so we now know, based on the Britspan research, that we do not have an absence of these collaborative vehicles on the continent. The challenge is that what is the capital that is flowing into these collaboratives? And so I will allude to a few structural conditions, and I do want to start by naming that we all know that the global funding, global capital sometimes flow through the known international organizations, institutions, rather than the African-led vehicles. But I'll pause and put a comma there and say we are seeing a very interesting shift, though. I think in the past 3 years or so, that is driven by large institutions that have adapted their grant-making systems to really fund into African-led vehicles. So I think that's something that we should celebrate as the continent. And then the second one, as I wrap up, Dr. Katindi, is around the fact that organizations are not easier to find. That's what we are hearing from funders. And so as Britspan, we are coming up with an infrastructure to help funders to be able to identify these existing philanthropic collaboratives. And it's a basic database that we've come up with that we are happy to share. It requires a lot of resources, though, to make it like an intuitive kind of infrastructure. But it's a start. There are 300 plus global philanthropic organizations that are there, so you can filter by a region, etc. So that would be a starting point. So those are some of the challenges I would mention.
Interesting. So I'll turn to you, Margaret, and just ask on this issue of undercapitalization, because it kept coming up yesterday as well. And obviously, you've been around for quite a while. And what I wonder is, and you're in global philanthropy, so you're in this conversation right at the center of it. So what is the primary structural reason these vehicles remain invisible to massive pools of global capital, like, donor advised funds?
Yeah. So I would say the money is there. Mm-hmm. The capital is there. Okay. In fact, data shows that there is $326 billion US annually that is available. But the challenge is the infrastructure needed to connect the capital to local vehicles. Mm-hmm. And I think yesterday, Irungu and Evans mentioned that the infrastructure that has been set is more on global. So you are thinking of charitable status, you are thinking of the fiduciary and compliance structures of large global funders and DAF administrators require to manage risk. So when you think about that, then what happens is there is need to really start thinking about what are governance mechanisms that can provide assurance to these large funders. Secondly, if you think about the local vehicles, they remain invisible, but they are doing incredibly impactful work. So I think there's also a way in which we need to think about the intermediary infrastructure that makes them easy for global funders to to support. And finally, I think there is need to build standardized and widely recognized funding infrastructure. And I saw a Irungu showing that work has been done by INPAS. That is part and parcel of trying to build that infrastructure that shows that there's capacity within the global south to manage that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So in this build fund, I mean, you said you've given out 2 billion.
Yeah.
2
billion.
Wow. 2 billion. You see, my mind has refused to process that amount of money.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'd be interested to hear what are some of the challenges that you encountered in either dispersing or managing, or just, the what you encountered with the organizations that you gave this money.
So I think our assumptions were that if you give big long-term grants, and grants that focus on the mission, grants that also support the building the institution, and a cohort of peer learners to share and exchange ideas, then you have solved the problem. But then we forgot one thing. We forgot that there are other factors that can easily derail that initiative. We didn't anticipate that USAID will pull out. So then what happened? The organizations ended up now using the very reserve funds we were talking about to fill in the gap. Secondly, one of the things that then also happened was we didn't anticipate that there were going to be lots of global shifts. And so what does that mean? So if you were to ask me now, what would happen is we would think about the emergency fund to support the emerging issues within the organizations. So, and I just want to say, also the other issue was we were expecting organizations that are passionate about change to think like for-profit organizations. So that what meant was, where is that shift when you are focused about the non-profit and so if on a hindsight, what I would do is would have accompaniment of organizations and to think if you are for-profit and non-profit, what do you do to make sure that the resources that you have, the capital that you have, you can grow it, but having a mindset of for-profit. So how do you recruit someone who thinks about building money instead of spending money?
And I think you bring a very interesting concept we discussed at the anticipatory or the foresight room masterclass, and it's the issue of systems. That sometimes we think when we give money that institutions will work, and then you realize, okay, if you don't have the right container, so this is the classic example of our water, then you don't really make progress. But then you also realize that within that system is people. And if people don't have the mind shift to actually do what they're supposed to do, you have a problem. And so all those systems have to work in tandem for you to be able to get the success you need. But allow me to turn to you, Abraham, again. So from what you seem to be saying from the fund is that it's purely funded by Ethiopians. And I guess the question I have is, you have an established architecture, you have a sound system that seems to be working. The question becomes, what are the specific trust barriers that would prevent, for example, a donor-advised fund from, using your vehicle to actually come in and fund some of these projects and partnerships that you may want to have to advance the cause that you're talking about? I'm just wondering, have you explored, funding from other, or have people come to ask whether they can input fund outside Ethiopians?
That's actually a fantastic question. And the one phrase I took from the question that you raised is the trust barriers. Obstacles that we have. We have a lot. Like every other nation in Africa, every other nation in the global south, we have projects coming from the World Banks, the USAID, saying the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And the government has all its involvements in those projects. So we have this experience of thinking that it would be abused or thinking that it would not go as planned. So the same was faced by the Ethiopian Diaspora Trust Fund. These people that are collaborating to bring together the fund are really aware of what is happening in philanthropy or what is claimed to happen in that area. So the points that I was trying to make earlier about making the governance of the organization robust and making it really strong in a way of bringing people together that are interested in helping their country, in helping maybe when they're second generation, in helping their country of their parents' origin. So, yeah, there is this assumption also that the government can interfere in any way. Yeah. But the trust fund made sure that it is completely apolitical, and that is shown in different mechanisms. For example, you can talk about it in your website, so you can post something about that. But unless you bring an evidence on the ground, that cannot hold any kind of water. So we really stress tested the whole thing. Now we believe that there is trust in the diaspora, in the belief that there is transparency, there is auditing process that is taking the US auditing and the local auditing and everything. We are 541c. If anyone from the US can correct me in that, was this law, exemption of tax and things of that nature. So we have that advantage, but still we're applying everything necessary to make sure that this is sustainable. So, and the other point that you mentioned or you raised is collaboration or bringing people together, bringing organizations together other than the Ethiopian diaspora living dispersed across the world. We're really trying because we went to different places of, Ethiopian residents live, for example, it could be the Europe or it could be in South Africa or in different African nations. But we have the intention, just to be correct about this point, we haven't actually actualized or materialized the real embodiment of that, or making that happen has been very difficult for us. But we think of bringing organizations and duplication of efforts is something that we want to avoid. So we are gearing toward that, and addressing the problem could be much easier in that way. Now that we have this awareness about Africans coming together in this way, especially East Africans coming together in this way, we want to be part of this family. We want to learn from you, and we can teach whatever we have. And if you want to learn about our governance and the other things, that could be one thing that we can teach. So going forward, that's one thing that we're thinking of, and one thing we think that we can achieve.
Awesome. So I want us to just do a last round of talking to ourselves, and then we can come to the questions. So just moving forward, of course, the interest of this conference is to make sure that we live with solutions. And to you, Ntefeleng, I want to ask, as the continent's collaborative ecosystem continues to expand, what would be your advice in terms of how can you, from your research, how would you help, or what advice would you give such kind of funds to be able to operate effectively?
Yes, so 6 quick points. First one is clear governance standards. We've spoken about that quite a bit, and that means clarity in terms of who makes the decisions, what kind of decisions are being made, and how are those decisions made. So that's the first one. The second one is around accountability to communities, not only to funders. And again, really just making sure that everything that we do is centered around communities. So ensuring that the voice of communities is designed into the governance mechanisms, it is designed into the grant-making processes and the learning processes as well. And then the third one is around the measurement and learning infrastructure. I've spoken about that. I've spoken about the research that we've done around that, really critical. And then the fourth one is around operating cost accountability. Again, really encouraging funders, Margaret, to fund what it takes when it comes to collaboratives. And then the fifth one is around visibility and diligence infrastructure. We are hearing from donors, whether it's true or not, I don't know, but most of them say they don't have visibility in terms of what collaboratives exist, especially on the continent. So really trying to help them with clearer typologies of what collaboratives exist, and just making sure that we help them even with due diligencing those collaboratives. And I would even say that, we now know that this is a growing field, right? So it cannot depend only on the word of mouth. And I would dare say it cannot depend on the elite donor networks, right? So we need to really make sure that we are transparent. And then the last one is around systems change. We know that it takes time, right? And it is a buzzword again, so sorry to the participants. And there are great examples of systems change, collaborative organizations on the continent. From Smart Start in South Africa, Ouagadougou partnerships, I've mentioned them, Africa Frontline First, and all the lessons from these organizations point to common themes. Again, please pardon me for the buzzwords. It is about flexible, patient funding. If we really want to see these collaboratives becoming infrastructure vehicles rather than temporary projects, then we have to invest just as much.
Okay, nice. Thank you very much. And to you, Margaret, I don't think any of us here minds the 2 billion access, right? So I want to ask, is it a model you would consider taking forward? And if so, would you advise other funders to adopt that model? And if so, what basically would you tell them to do, maybe similar or different?
Currently our grants portfolio, 70% of our grants portfolio are following that model. We are thinking of flexible, and allowing our partners to be at the driver's seat because they are closer to the issues and they have the responses and answers to what needs to be done. Yeah. But again, one of the things that we encourage is that organizations must also focus on not relying on one funder. Yeah. So there has to be multiple funders. And again, we are also encouraging local capital because in your session yesterday on the foresight, we don't know what is going to happen tomorrow. And what if the likes of Ford are not there? What will happen to that work? And then something else that we have done is Ford has really worked with other funders to make sure that this collaboration continues. And we have anchored it in 3 ways. One, we have started off funds and we have had other funders coming. For instance, when you think about the Forest 10-year fund, we started that fund and many other funders came into that collaboration. It now stands at pledges at 1.7 billion. And so that one has again mechanisms of operation, and grantees don't have to be subjected to 20 different, or 50 different compliance issues. It's just one issue. Thinking about also what has happened in West Africa, we have also worked with other funders, and we have started the West Africa Democracy Fund. Now, the West Africa Democracy Fund at the moment is at $20 million US. But again, it's been established with the partners within the West Africa who have the proximity to the issues that they are speaking about. And then finally, I think it is really critical, even as we think about collaborative funds, to ask ourselves, those who are setting up these funds, are we creating more bottlenecks for the communities than even when they get the funds from the source. And one of the things that we have realized is there are sometimes when you even have intermediaries, they create a lot of bottlenecks, and it becomes really difficult for even community-based organizations to access those funds. And so it's also around how do you balance accountability and at the same time balance, bring in the issue of flexibility. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. And Abraham, what would you advise other countries that would like to start the kind of fund that you have here in Ethiopia?
Given what is happening in the world and given the attitude that the global north has of philanthropy or charity works, anything that has to do with charity, we don't have any other option than adopting whatever venues, whatever resources that we have and harnessing that resource. I mean, for Ethiopia as a country, we benefit all sort of things that other African brothers and sisters are benefiting, but it comes with a cost of compromising the policy, compromising the attitude, the values, and other things. You understand that if a money comes or any kind of fund comes from any other part of the world, in the form of maybe donations or something like that, it is not free for you to use and develop in the way that you want. So there is a lot of strings attached to it. So the only option we believe as the Ethiopian Diaspora Trust Fund for African brothers and sisters and people living in the global south is to actually realize that we have what it takes. It's not convenient for only narrative or storytelling to say that we have the resources, we have the human capital, we have the conducive weather and things of that nature. We actually have all of those. The thing is, when can we realize that we have those and tap into those potentials? So we're thinking of, the people that I'm telling you about, the board of directors and diaspora that are contributing to the Ethiopian Diaspora Trust Fund are people that are educated in the West. But these people came to realize really worshiping whatever coming from the West wouldn't last. We're seeing the appetite from the Western side of the governments from the West and the attitude that they have towards Africa, the attitude they have towards people they consider poor. But Africa is not poor. We have all the resources. We have everything it takes to do what they're doing for ourselves. So I personally encourage, and I think it's time for Africa to be dependent on its children and its resources. I shouldn't say more than that.
Okay. All right. So you've had it for yourselves. A perspective on localized fundraising, a perspective on legacy, global funding, and a perspective from research. And so we want to turn to you to ask your questions. We have about 20 minutes, and then, of course, of question and answer, and then we shall wrap up so that we are faithful in keeping time. So you raise your hand first. You will be my first person. I want to give you numbers. So you'll be number 1. You'll be number 2, the lady in glasses. I hope you're a lady. Yes, okay. There's so much reflection. So, and then there's number 3, yes. And then there's number 4 in orange. Okay, number 4 and 5. Is there anyone on that side? Okay, number 6 at the front and number 7. So we'll take, please write the questions that are relevant to you, and then we can do that first round. Please make your questions brief and to the point so that we take as much as possible and we can contribute to what we were told about giving back time for discussion.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the presentation by all the panelists. My name is Dr. Gezahay. I'm the East Africa Director for an organization called Max Foundation. My question is not directed to any of the panelists, but any one of them can actually reflect on it. The question we are discussing about is movement of resources from where it originates to where it is needed. In so doing, basically, from the source point of view, if we ask what is the very important and critical indicator of success in all what we are doing, in my view and in the view of some of us, the best indicator of success is the speed at which we make ourselves irrelevant for the context that we are there. But there are organizations who have been pushing resources year after year, decade after decade, through projects in different countries. So my question to any one of you is, have you ever thought that you have really succeeded in what you are doing, whereby organizations who are receiving this money are really dependent on those resources coming from the sources? Because philanthropy should not be seen as a cause for dependency. So I just want you to reflect, because of the success indicator is the speed at which we make ourselves irrelevant. If we consider ourselves relevant year after year, decade after decade, it actually means that we haven't done our job. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll move on to the second question. It was in the middle here. Yep, in the middle.
Good morning. Allow me stand. I'm a bit short, vertically challenged, but I'm okay. My name is Nkata. I'm based from Kenya, Nakuru County. And my question goes to Madam Muliwa. I have two questions for you. And number one, you talked about the governance mechanisms and in terms of infrastructure and how Ford Foundation is supporting organizations across the world. And so the question is, what governance mechanisms can you help build? Can you help to build trust among funders and intermediaries? And then number two, you talked about the $2 billion that the Ford Foundation has put to the world. And so my question for you is, as an organization that's reaching out and stretching out their hand towards the organizations, so what is Ford Foundation doing to help the grassroots organizations access the $2 billion? Because we know majority of them, they kind of struggle with the organizational structures and capacity building and strengthening of the organizations. So how accessible is this $2 billion to the local organizations across Africa? Thank you.
Thank you very much to the panelists for a very good presentation. My name is Geoffrey Kayonde. I come from Rwanda. I chair the network of international non-government organizations, and I'm a country director of ADRA. I have one question for Abraham and one question perhaps to all the panelists. One to Abraham is the good intention of the fund and the lessons that you have learned from wherever you were, and what you can share with other diaspora sections of Africans. You have many from Nigeria, you have many from Kenya and other places. Do you have a place where you meet and say, this is what we have learned, this is what we can share with other African brothers and sisters? The other question to you is, we have been told over and over that there's about $100 million that flow to Africa as capital. And this, you look at it as philanthropy, but I wouldn't 100% say it is philanthropy. What is your motivation? You mentioned that you kind of cautious to work with the government because of the fears that you may be having. But I also would think that governments have strategic priorities for their countries and their deputy bearers. So whatever they do, our philanthropic efforts should be supplementing what they are doing. Now, when we work in parallel or not with them, or when we don't trust them, how sustainable are our interventions? And lastly, a question related to what the doctor asked before. Ford has been in existence for 90 years, celebrating 90 years of charity. And what is it that we are seeing that is not changing, that we are existing 90 years and problems are still problems? Clean water, alleviating, a little bit of. Why are we scratching on the surface? Are we missionaries with an ending mission? What can we do to address the root causes so that this capital may not be creating dependency? Maybe it is not a very friendly question. Good morning.
Okay, so George has just said, please, let's not get... All right, that was number 3. So number 4.
Hello, my name is Valeria from Light Up Impact Kenya. We support young grassroots founders with skills to lead. My question to the panelists, it's about the role of the intermediary organizations, or what we call enablers, in this era where capital is moving differently. What do I mean by that? I think Margaret mentioned before that we're moving away from project-based funding into mission, funding missions and long-term, right? So what is the shift that you see or that you expect from the enablers to being able to support this different type of funding? Because we will also need different type of skills, different types of trainings. So we need to adapt the way we are also working. So that's my question. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Duncan Kome. I represent Society for International Development, based in Nairobi and Rome, and the School of International Futures. I think a question I would have would be for you, Abraham, because we have spoken a lot. We talk about talk shops now, and what you're offering or what you are pointing out actually is a solution that might be an innovation that probably just needs some polishing. And I would be keen to understand if, similar to what Katindi was asking, if there are other collaborations that are looking at external funders. I'm looking inwardly because historically we used to have the Great Kingdom of Ethiopia, and it was upper and lower. And lower Ethiopia actually was part of a huge chunk of sub-Saharan Africa. And there was some sense of cultural belonging, even in the way that we were developing. And I'm seeing this as one of those pointers. Can you then, with the, I'm seeing people like Ford Foundation and the East African Philanthropy Network, try and democratize this towards the region, this model that you have come up with for a diaspora trust fund. And then maybe if we all chip in, we will have a facility that can actually go a long way in mitigating some of those concerns.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you. So in front of you, that's number 6.
Hi, my name is Rachel Mwikali. I come from Pussy Power Movement and Coalition for Grassroots Human Defenders, and I'm happy to see Margaret there. My question also would be based on intermediary. The fact also, I acknowledge I'm a grantee of Ford, ULET, and Open Society Foundation. Foundations are saying shift the power to communities, but we know clearly the intermediary, as much as we acknowledge the role they've been playing, but also some have been the stress points or some of the things social movement and feminist movement we are fighting around inequalities and around also the stress around accessing resources. So my question would be to how do we improve this inequality that sometimes is caused by intermediary for grassroots organization and feminist movement, but ensuring there's a good relationship between them and us in the grassroots. Being that we know clearly, some of us would prefer, let's say, going direct to the funders because there's no stress. But the intermediary play a big role also where we acknowledge their system, but sometimes they're also stressful.
Thank you. So the last question was behind you.
Thank you. My name is Moses Isoba. I'm from Uganda and I lead a platform there. I'm a grantee of the BUILD program. Now, with the BUILD program, we were able to move to a very healthy institution and we were able to improve our fundraising capabilities. The challenge was that then the subsequent donors became reluctant to provide overhead costs to contribute because they felt, oh no, you already have this, you already have this. So, Margaret, as you celebrate 90 years, we know that Ford Foundation is a foundation with the right genetic material. And we need to clone more of Ford. We need to have more Fords. The question is, many of these foundations are family foundations with their own priorities. How do we have more Fords that have that right genetic material that can enable us to be able to say, look, even when you find an organization that has benefited from a grant, a BUILD grant, you should still be able to contribute in a prorated manner to or costs that help this institution to grow.
All right. So I'll give the first take to Margaret. I think you have the bulk of the questions.
So thank you so much for these very many questions. I want to start with what are the indicators of success for what we are doing. I think for all of us being here and discussing these pertinent issues is already an indicator of success. And I think we have to continuously be honest around these conversations and funding and the issue around dependency. And I think for funders like ourselves, our role is more of a catalytic. We are not supposed to replace institutions, specifically governments. And so what we do is we only are here to support ideas, to support individuals and institutions. And when I speak about institutions, we don't just support civil society organizations alone. We also support government. We support private sector. And for us, that is important to continue building conversations around funding or capital. Secondly, I want to address the issue on governance mechanisms. I think one of the things that is very clear for us is in whichever country we operate within the governance systems of those countries. And in situations where then we are looking at the work that we do, as Ford, we come in fact, we claim and try and practice trust-based philanthropy. And so the trust-based philanthropy is that even for the community-based organizations, we understand that you may not have the ability to have quite a number of governance systems in place. So we also try as much as possible to bend towards you, but there are also the other governance issues that you have to comply with the government of the day. But as far as grants is concerned, we are very keen on helping. And one of the things that we have done, we've recognized some of these challenges. So we started in 2020 what we call the Weaving Resilience Fund, and supported key organizations. And I saw someone from Kenya Community Development Fund. In Uganda, we supported CIV Fund. In Tanzania, Foundation for Civil Society. And these organizations really were to offer services to small organization or community-based organization. And these services range from a whole on management, finance audits, helping you even think through what does your strategy look like, and all the services that you may need to make your organization strong or meet the compliance that is needed. And so that is one of the things that we have been able to do to support organization. And then there was again the root causes. I think this is not just a question from for the funders alone. This is a question that needs to have more conversations with every other person, whether it's private sector, government, and continuously think about it. And as Ford, one of the things that we have really tried to do is to have conversations with organizations. And I think one of the things that we have not also mentioned, Ford does not just give grants to civil society. We have what we call mission investment. So we also invest in businesses, you know, that are their focus is more on fulfilling the mission of Ford Foundation, which is to alleviate or rather reduce poverty, injustices, and human development and the like. And then I also wanted to maybe shift to the role of intermediary. And I want to just also say there's a lot of work that has gone in conversations around intermediaries. And for sure, those intermediaries we support, we also expect them, or rather we have deep conversations with them around really having models like those of Ford. And that's why I said, if intermediary is creating bottleneck, then there's a problem there. And again, I hope that even as we think of intermediaries, that you continuously feed back to them regarding their models of funding and how they continue doing that. And then on the issue of sharing more of Ford, I think Ford has done a lot of work on collaborative funds, not just here from the global perspective. We have collaborative funds on disability, energy transition. We have collaborative funds on land tenure. We have also supported other intermediaries that look at like African Women Development Fund. And so there are quite a lot of things that we have continuously done. And this is really to support organizations to continuously build their resilience and think of more. But my final point is, if all this effort we are doing, the people who are at the forefront of change are not involved, then we are not doing anything. And for me, any fund that is not including, or that is not inclusive of the community and decisions of the community, then the minute that funder leaves, then that fund also leaves. So it must be anchored in the communities and what the beliefs of the communities and the desires of communities are.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to turn over to Abraham. You had maybe the next lot of questions.
Okay. Those were really sharp questions, and I want to compliment the point that is made from a brother from the side about government and the Ethiopian Diaspora Trust Fund, and if there is any complementarity in the works that we do. I was not evading the responsibility of the government to actually contribute to whatever works we do. The government has huge projects everywhere in the country. It is building different infrastructures. We are benefiting from all of those. So I myself have been in the public sector for many years, maybe for more than a decade. So I understand how the government operates and the contributions that the government could provide for facilitating our works, making our works very easy. So in any way, I was not actually indicating that we avoid the government. The thing I was trying to make is there is the conventional way of doing business in philanthropy. The conventional way of doing business could be misunderstood if government is involved in that way. That was what I was trying to make. So to create that confidence in the diaspora so that the diaspora can continue contributing to the efforts that we are having within the country. We want to make sure that there is transparency, there is a political nature of the works that we're doing here. So that was the indication I was trying to make. And from the inception of the Ethiopian Diaspora Trust Fund, what we have actually done in that aspect is we were not about compounding the overheads. We were actually about making sure all the money that is coming from the diaspora is put into the projects that we have. So we really engaged in that way a lot, and that has actually contributed much to the confidence building of the diaspora contributors that we have. These people we have from the diaspora are not rich individuals. These are individuals that are taxi drivers, Uber drivers, or nurses and people that have, random kind of jobs. So we want to make sure that everything that is coming from there is put into the correct or the right thing in the country, within the country. So we are in the faraway places, for example, in the regions like Afar in Ethiopia, working on the water projects and the wash facilities, just to make sure that the confidence of the diaspora is built in that way, and they have a sustained mentality that we're doing that work in the way they want it, because we're trustees. We're actually making sure their money is put into the the right project. That's the point I wanted to make sure. And the point that is raised from here, I agree about Ethiopia. I'm from this country. I was born and raised in Ethiopia. Maybe went to some study other places or Europe, America, or something like that. But Ethiopia, all in all. So the point you make about you made about coming together, chipping in, or contributing something, that is a fantastic idea. From the very outset, I mentioned that this is a privilege for us. Meeting you guys, having this conversation is a privilege. So if we continue this conversation, if we can have this conversation in the future, we can contribute a lot and we can learn a lot from each organization or the countries that you're from. So we're ready for that. We're open for that. That's what I can say about all the issues that the points that you made. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. And lastly, Interpeleng.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I will start with the first question around the indicators of success. And thanks to Evans, I was tossing and turning last night because he challenged us, and I was thinking about the fact that I might be part of a generation that has been attending conferences after conference after conference and nothing changes. So I think, the first person who asked the question is spot on in terms of how do we move away from really being dependent on the resources. And I think the next chapter of development in Africa really lies in unlocking domestic resources, period. So we really need to look into that. And then the other contribution I want to make is around intermediaries. I honestly don't think it's an either or, especially in the context of where we are in development in Africa. So yes, there are funders that are willing to get resources directly to communities. That's great. But we also know that there are funders that are risk averse, that do not necessarily want to give directly to communities. So intermediaries are really critical in terms of making sure that they address that concern from those funders. And that it doesn't necessarily mean that we're not agreeing that resources should be moved directly to communities. And then the last contribution I would make on the African diaspora giving, we recently published an article around how should we be unlocking African diaspora giving. And one of the use cases we have is of Nigeria. Nigeria diaspora giving is one of those that are, I would say, matured, comparatively speaking. And of course, I've just now learned of the Ethiopian Diaspora Trust as well. And one of the things that Nigeria is doing is they have a government representative that sits as part of the Nigerian Diaspora Giving Initiative. And the reason why they have that government representative is because they want to make sure that whatever initiatives they're talking about, changes they want to make, are integrated into government policy. And this is responding directly to the question around ensuring that these initiatives are aligned to government priorities. So I think it really is a great example because you have government sitting in there, understanding what are the complexities, what are the challenges, what are the barriers, and then on the other side, really just trying to make sure that they align with government in terms of what needs to happen.
Awesome. So my contribution to just one of the questions by Max. We've done a few foresight facilitation processes. And when we've done scenarios and we stress test organizations against, particularly philanthropy, against where will they do best, they actually thrive where there are chaos. And they will always fail when institutions actually are localized, have resources, and are doing very well or are at their best. And that means that they are fundamentally institutionalized, not to be able to enable organizations to succeed and leave, but they are basically institutionalized to react to the problems. And maybe that institutional infrastructure needs to change so that you make sure that you are creating sustainability and are able to come out. So folks, that's our time. And to conclude my story, have you wondered why this person who was fetching water continued to fetch water with a broken pot over and over? Have you wondered that? Yes. So to conclude my story, this farmer actually had a pattern. They'd always carry the broken pot on one side. Maybe let's assume it's the right. And obviously, what then would happen is that on the side where the broken pot was, there actually was a garden of flowers. And to conclude our panel, ours is to say that let's not forget that our broken pot and our infrastructure has done well, even if it has done its time. But perhaps to be future fit, we will need to fix the pot, we will need to make new pots, and perhaps we will need to build new vessels that are not pots, all right? And so with that, I say thank you very much for indulging us, and we really appreciate that you were able to listen to us.